ToBI Representations in Intonational Phonology. Time for a melodic change?
Appeared in the 1980s and becoming a standard during the 1990 to 2000 period, the ToBI notation system, basically transcribing high and low tone targets, has been the de facto standard in phonological representation of sentence intonation. Originally designed for American English, its extensions and adaptations to many other languages silenced other notation systems which became in practice completely invisible to researchers in prosody.
However, many problems can be identified pertaining not to the principles underlying the ToBI notation, but towards its use. While the apparent difficulty to transcribe a moderate versus a large fundamental frequency span can be remedied contrasting H and HH for example, or L and LL for low tone targets, its actual use linked to a direct F0 curve observation can be problematic. Leaving aside the sometimes questionable reliability of pitch trackers, many transcriptions do not hesitate to consider insignificant pitch changes, as low as 5 Hz as high tone targets, therefore transcribed as a H tone, the same notation than a 45 Hz rise for example, the duration of the pitch change being totally absent in the annotation.
Another problem is linked to the frequent confusion between phonetic and phonological transcription. Even if the goal of phonological transcription is to give a proper account of whatever prosodic events results from the speaker control, opposed to what is contingent to physiological constraint which pertains to phonetics, it should not be forgotten that the observed prosodic data result from the superposition of many processes. A sound representation system should clearly define from the beginning what specific function is addressed when a transcription system is used. More than often, current phonological description of sentence intonation seems to address many functions at once, resulting in total confusion in the validity of the description by mixing non-pertinent characteristics of prosodic events related to multiple roles.
Perhaps the first thing to do is to reconsider the relationship of sentence intonation with the other linguistic objects in the sentence. Roughly, the autosegmental metrical model envisions the prosodic events, and particularly the prosodic structure, as an emanation of syntax. Accent phrases, as minimal prosodic units, are assumed to contain only one non-emphatic stressed syllable, and therefore one content word, verb, noun, adjective or adverb, opposed to lexical words, conjunction, pronoun, article, preposition. Their optional assembly into intermediate intonational phrases, then of intermediate intonational phrases into intonational phrases, and finally of intonational phrases into the sentence prosodic structure, proceeds a priori with congruence with syntax, the occasional non-congruence being described relatively to the sentence syntactic structure, considered as the reference in the process.
However, the theoretical view giving a reference status to syntax should be re-evaluated at the light of recent experimental findings. In this respect, the emergence of a large amount of data coming from spontaneous speech analysis could be fruitful. More and more arguments, instead of considering the prosodic structure as the cherry on the syntactic cake, suggest that the sequences of prosodic events indicating a partial prosodic structure appear to be planned before the accent phrase's syntactic chunks. The analysis of hesitations, abandons, reformulations and repetitions in spontaneous speech production shows clearly that the corrected accent phrases segments do not involve any prosodic change from the planned ones, whose melodic markers remain in place. This apparently applies to observed error analysis occurring in read as well as spontaneous speech.
The other possible theoretical revision concerns the annotation system itself. Other than not being very intuitive, transcription by tonal targets, especially by a unique level tonal target high or low, is not really backed by experimental data pertaining to speech perception, at least for non-tonal languages. Even pioneer work such as conducted by the IPO labs in the 70s shows that human perception proceeds by pitch change and not by pitch levels. Rather than tonal targets, a notation operating on the base of pitch contours may reveal much more satisfactory from both points of view, perceptual and experimental. The use of a perception criterion such as the glissando threshold, however approximative, gives some indication about the pertinence of F0 movements observed on pitch tracks, separating pitch changes perceived from those which are perceived as static tones.
Let's define the prosodic structure as a hierarchical organization of accent phrases, the minimal prosodic units, leaving aside the strict layer hypothesis. This means that accent phrases can be assembled in multiple levels, all of the same kind, i.e. as sequences of APs. In languages such as English or Italian, content words bear a morphological syllabic stress, essentially located on its stressed syllable vowel, following voiced consonants will be left apart. It follows from the definition that if an accent phrase contains a content word, no other word can be stressed, except an eventual emphatic stress. but it does not necessarily say that a grammatical word cannot be stressed and be part of an accent phrase, where no other word would be stressed. In a sequence such that I believe that, for the most part, the conjunction that can be stressed and constitute an accent phrase in itself. I believe that, for the most part.
Non-lexically stressed languages such as French or Korean may be considered to see things more clearly. Although it may be surprising or even unbelievable to some linguists, French has a stress system which does not indicate any morphological word boundary and places a stress on any word last syllable, subject to rhythmic constraints. These constraints specify that no consecutive stressed syllables cannot be closer than about 250 milliseconds and cannot be separated by more than some 1250 milliseconds. This implies that an accent phrase in French can contain more than one content word, depending on the speaker's speech rate, or no content word at all. An eurythmicity process plays also a role in balancing the duration of consecutive accent phrases, either by adjusting the speech rate from one accent phrase to the next, spontaneous speech, or by selecting the words contained in accent phrases to attain a comparable number of syllables, read speech.
The next step consists of defining appropriate natural classes of prosodic events to give a satisfactory account of the function selected, to indicate the prosodic structure itself or another role given to sentence intonation, such as its modality. These events are located on stressed syllables, and possibly on another remarkable location, such as the last syllable of accent phrases. In French, these positions are the same as the accent phrase last syllable is necessarily stressed. Instead of adopting high and low as tonal target primitives, in order to follow the melodic curve more closely while not being abused by insignificant changes in F0, the basic contour's first feature will be falling and rising. To differentiate contours perceived as melodic changes from those perceived as static tones, the glissando threshold constitutes a satisfactory possibility, even if it constitutes an approximation, separating F0 perceived change from those perceived as static.
Glissando values are computed with the formula ST2 minus ST1 divided by T2 minus T1, with ST1 and ST2 being respectively the semitones values at the beginning and at the end of F0 variation, and T2 minus T1, the duration of the pitch movement. Values above a glissando threshold are considered perceived as melodic variations, those below as static tones, at 2/3 of the pitch change. At this point we have four classes of contours: rising above the glissando threshold, falling above the glissando threshold, and rising and falling below the glissando threshold. These last categories can merge into one, called neutralized, as their melodic change rising or falling is not perceived as such.
Two other classes do differentiate terminal conclusive contours: declarative and interrogative. The rising, interrogative, and falling, declarative, melodic changes, which can be found on the last stressed syllable of the sentence, but also in certain cases on its final syllable, e.g. in Italian, indicate the basic modalities declarative or interrogative of the sentence. The range of fundamental frequency variation is plausible option, leading to set the interrogative terminal contour with a larger span than the rising contour above the glissando threshold, but not in final position in the sentence. Likewise, the declarative terminal contour, usually above the glissando threshold, could be characterized by the lowest F0 value in the sentence, traditionally described as a pertinent feature in experimental phonetics.
In summary, the classes needed for the phonological transcription of French sentence intonation are: C. Declarative. Terminal conclusive declarative contour, falling, reaching the lowest F0 level, above the glissando threshold. C. Interrogative. Terminal conclusive interrogative contour, rising, reaching the highest F0 level, above the glissando threshold. C. Rising. Non-terminal rising higher than the glissando level. C. Falling. Non-terminal falling higher than the glissando level. C. Neutral. Non-terminal rising or falling, lower than the glissando level. In order to establish the distribution of the melodic contours defined above, we proceed by increasing complexity of the prosodic structure. One of the points rarely evoked in autosegmental metrical phonological intonative description pertains to the possible neutralization processes from the configuration of a given prosodic structure. A simple example involving a sentence with a single accent phrase will illustrate this point. In such a configuration, there is only one stressed syllable, and thus one stressed vowel, carrying a terminal conclusive contour, which can be declarative or interrogative, leaving the variance aside. Considering the contrast necessary and sufficient to effectively indicate this modality in this simple configuration, only one feature would be necessary, such as rising, marked, versus falling, unmarked. C. Declarative is minus rising versus C. Interrogative is plus rising. In a sentence with a single accent phrase, no other contrast is necessary to indicate its modality.
As the prosodic structure becomes more complex, at this stage alignment with syntactic chunks is not involved, the need for more contrasting features emerges. A prosodic structure with two accent phrases could have the first or the second accent phrase or both ended by a conclusive terminal declarative contour C declarative.
C declarative, C declarative, CX, C declarative, C declarative, CY.
The first case implies either two distinct sentences, ended with a terminal conclusive contour, or a configuration with two prosodic ends associated to a single sentence. This latter possibility is called differed complement, where two or more independent prosodic structure are associated with a single sentence text, implying the explicit syntactic link, which as in I know many buildings C declarative, which must be demolished C declarative.
For case 2, the so far unspecified contour CX must contrast with C declarative. Choosing among the classes defined above, it could be C rising, C falling or C neutral. C falling could be eliminated as rarely attested in the experimental data. This leaves C rising C declarative and neutral C declarative as well-formed sequences. The contrast between C rising and C declarative is ensured by the feature extreme. C rising minus extreme, C declarative plus extreme. From examination of data, the third case, 3, corresponds to the Riem theme configuration, characterized by a C-neutral terminal contour placed after the terminal, conclusive C declarative C neutral. The contrast C declarative C neutral is secured by the glissando threshold condition. Plus or minus glissando. In summary, in a 2AP's prosodic structure, melodic contour features necessary and sufficient on both paradigmatic and syntagmatic axes are shown here, paradigmatic contrasts are in parenthesis. Prosodic structure with three accent phrases will of course involve more features ensuring more contrasts between the accent phrases' melodic contours. Considering only prosodic structure ended by a declarative terminal conclusive contour, we have three possible configurations.
CX, CX, C declarative, CY, CX, C declarative, CX, CY, C declarative.
Melodic contour features necessary and sufficient to differentiate the three configurations involving three accent phrases are shown here.
It can be also shown that the prosodic structure is defined by dependency relations to the right, existing between melodic contours, as follows. A neutralized contour depends on the presence later in the sentence of either a falling, rising or terminal contour. C neutral depends on either C falling, C rising or C declarative. A falling contour depends on the presence later in the sentence of a rising contour. C falling depends on C rising. A rising contour depends on the presence later in the sentence of a terminal contour. C rising depends on C declarative.
An example of the melodic contours and the resulting prosodic structure on a read sentence in French.
Deux alpinistes allemands ont trouvé le cadavre d'un homme dans un glacier.
Two German mountaineers found the corpse of a man in a glacier.
The resulting prosodic structure is not congruent with the verb-phrase syntax, which can be easily explained by the reading process operating from left to right.
The glissando threshold, as the formula giving its value involves a parameter varying in the literature from 0.16 to 0.32, but also as the estimation of change in F0 perception, implies linearity of the melodic change. In reality, in most speech styles more or less close to reading style, the change in F0 is linear in both linear and logarithmic scale. However, concave or convex shapes can be found in some specific speech styles or sociogeographic productions, e.g. Swiss French.
Facing the dominance of the autosegmental metrical model and the concomitant use of the ToBI transcription notation system, we propose an alternate model radically different in terms of overall comprehension of the linguistic aspects of sentence intonation. Indeed, in the view presented here, the intonational grammar does not result from a collection of well-formed sequences of tone targets, where only boundary tones have a linguistic role, by signaling the end of so-called intonation phrases as main assembly of accent phrases. On the contrary, they stem from a simple and coherent view of the sentence prosodic structure actually pre-existing to syntactic units and organization.
The resulting grammar of intonation is then easily obtained from logical consideration pertaining to combinatorial analysis of prosodic structures, where the neutralization process plays a central role. Describing the relations between melodic contours assigned to accent phrases, pitch accents leads to a dependency grammar based on the melodic contours distribution, as observed on experimental data, which, contrary to most autosegmental metrical studies, go far beyond simple sentences with few words, and which is easily extended to spontaneous speech intonational analysis.
Furthermore, instead of tone targets aligned on IP boundaries and pitch accent having no interaction with each other, phonologically pertinent prosodic events are described in terms of perceived melodic changes located on stressed syllables vowels, leading to classes of melodic contours experimentally easy to characterize. Rising and falling, above or below the glissando threshold.